general purpose of this project is to bring automation to an existing gravel pit setup. This definitely brings some challenges with it as opposed to starting a pit setup with automation from scratch. Instead of wiring all of the automation controls in from the beginning, you have to figure out how to integrate it in the most efficient and useful way possible. Here you can see an overview of our pit setup right now. The only differences are that we don't have the option to add these conveyors yet. All we're doing is dumping directly into the apron feeder and the jaw shaker right here. But eventually we're going to add in the feeder conveyor and then up to 5 transfer conveyors. And then as of right now we only have 2 transfer conveyors here to go out to the pile. Here's some pictures from actually out at the mine. This is looking from the pile direction. This is the pile conveyor here. And on the left is the cone crusher, in the middle is the screener, and on the right side is the jaw crusher. Here's another kind of more of a side view going down the pile conveyor line. And this is looking at the cone crusher here on the left. The conveyor coming out of the cone crusher, going into the screener, and then we have a conveyor coming out of the screener and into the cone. Another side picture on the pile line. And this is looking towards the screener. I'm standing on the jaw crusher, and the cone crusher is on the opposite side here, and we have our job trailer over here. This is just a SketchUp of the overview of our gravel pit, and this was a template that was used for one of the cabinets with a bunch of start-stops on it. So when you decide to start a project like this, the first thing you need to do is really just figure out what exactly you want to accomplish. And it varies drastically from one project to another, but we just looked at the hardware that we already had installed out at the mine and decided exactly what we wanted to do. And our main goal was to be able to control the pit setup remotely from a wheel loader. And how we decided to do that was with an iPad in the loader, and then a panel view in the job trailer, and then I just have VNC enabled on the panel view in order to control it from the loader and just over a wireless network. Adding automation to our gravel pit just seemed like a smart choice because we knew that it would make it a more efficient process, and it would just be a more intuitive experience for the operator. The iPad will give our operator an extremely easy way to control and monitor the process and reduce the number of stoppages, and also cut down on the severity of the inevitable stoppages. After we figured out our main goal for this project, we had to decide on the hardware to complete it. We went with the new 5069 controller from Allen Bradley, and this required buying Studio 5000 since our copy of RS Logix 5000 wouldn't be sufficient. And we also figured out that we needed to place 4 total enclosures by the cone crusher, jaw crusher, screener, and pit conveyor setups. And we decided to go with .io for the remote racks because they were cheaper and they matched our needs better than the 5069 remote racks. And as you can see here, I have the main controller. It's a 5069 L306ER, and I just have 2 analog cards here, 2 discrete cards here, and then a field potential distributor, splitting them up since the discrete cards are 120. And I just have a power supply and a switch here, and 1 breaker. I added another one after the fact for 120 volt power. This is for 24, and just a control relay for e-stop power. And I also decided that I wanted to run every point out to a terminal block, just because it'd be easier to use terminal blocks rather than going directly into the controller every time that you needed to switch something around, and I don't want everybody to have access to possibly messing up the terminals at some point. And another thing that you really need to consider when you're doing a project like this is enclosure size. As you can see, this one is it's a little congested, but I mean, I definitely wouldn't want it any smaller. But enclosure size is something you really need to consider, because you don't want to pick too small of an enclosure, otherwise you really limit yourself with what you can do in the future without completely going to a bigger enclosure and redesigning your system. Here's our network map. Each switch represents an enclosure, and the Panel View Plus is located in the job trailer. And here's the two wireless access points. They're mounted through the enclosures. And then our iPad is going to be located in a wheel loader. Here we have our main PLC and then 3 remote racks. After I figured out exactly what we needed for our hardware, I got to work on the programs for the HMI and the PLC. And they both pretty much ended up the way that I wanted them. I had to add the ability to add and subtract optional conveyors in a few different areas. So what I did for that on my HMI was in the pit conveyor setup, you can add up to 4 extra conveyors. You can add up to 2 extra conveyors in the pile conveyor line. And then we have an optional auxiliary conveyor over here that we don't have yet, but we want the ability to add in the future. And the reason that we'd want to add this auxiliary conveyor is because these 2 cross conveyors can be reconfigured. And right now we just have them set up that they're both feeding into the cone. But if we want to switch them around later and possibly have just an extra rock pile, we can do that, and the auxiliary conveyor will take the pile further away from the screener. How I did that in my program is I have an enable bit that's controlled by these buttons. So for the pile transfer 2, it would be that bit right there. And it controls whether or not the sequence timer goes. So if you have this conveyor enabled, the timer will go off and it'll start pile transfer conveyor 2. The run confirm from that transfer conveyor will start the timer for transfer 1. But if that bit is not enabled, as you can see here, it will run off of the pile conveyor run confirm, which is the output before those the optional transfer conveyors. And that's how I have it on all of those optional conveyors. Besides that, in my HMI, I've added the ability to stop the outputs from the loader. It's not a true e-stop, but if I press this e-stop, I'll get an alarm that comes up that says e-stop pressed. Obviously it's the HMI e-stop. I can go ahead and reset that. But if I press an e-stop on one of my enclosures, this is what it gives me. I have it programmed so it'll show up an alarm. So right here you can see cone crusher cabinet e-stop pressed. I had already acknowledged it. And it'll give you a little banner on the actual location that the e-stop was pressed. So in this case, it's on the cone crusher. It could be on the screener or on the jaw crusher, or the pit conveyor control cabinet. Some other areas that I focused in on the HMI. I added the ability to put the system into either auto or manual mode from the main screen. You can also start or stop the system sequence. I've also added the ability to change the on timer and off timer set points for each output. Just a general alarming page. And I've also added a system information page to give the operator a little bit more information about what's going on. If your system is in manual mode, you can go to the manual start stop page and manually control each output. If the output is off, it'll give you this red banner. If it's on, it'll give you a green banner. I've added an analog info page that gives you a little bit of information about the 4 different analog inputs and outputs we have in the system. And it also gives you the ability to adjust the speed of the 2 VFD controlled outputs. Just click on the field here and you can enter whatever measurement you want. You can also do this on the main page. You've got the speed adjustments here and then the 2 amp meter readings here. I also added a camera page, but it's currently not running yet because we don't have a camera installed. And then on each page, you probably notice that I have this Ethernet port flashing, and that's just to give the operator a little heads up if he has any connection issues from the HMI to the PLC. One troubleshooting aspect that I added to my HMI would be with overload conditions. If I switch over to FactoryTalk here, go to my main page, you'll see all these caution symbols, and say the overload trips on the screen deck. This caution symbol will come up here, but it'll also pop up on the screen deck itself. So it's just kind of one way to show the operator exactly where the issue is and what it is really. And also in the sequence, if an overload condition exists, if it exists before the system starts, obviously the sequence will stop at that point. It won't start the conveyor after it until the current conveyor selected starts. And if it happens during operation, which it is obviously when it would normally happen, that output will shut off, but it'll also shut off every output in front of it in line, just so you don't have a pile-up condition where you're starting to bury a conveyor or something like that. It took a little bit of thinking to finally decide on the setup for HMIs. I thought about using FactoryTalk Viewpoint on an iPad, and then possibly using like a Microsoft Surface in the loader as a standalone HMI, or putting a PC in the job trailer with an ME station license. But I ended up deciding to put a PanelView Plus in the job trailer and the iPad in the loader with VNC into the PanelView. And that way, the only connection is through VNC, and you aren't actually sending a lot of data over a flaky wireless connection, and you're not storing values in your HMI in the loader. So if you do get out of range, you're not going to lose anything that you had set. And I don't know that would have even happened with Viewpoint, but I just like the idea of having all of the processes actually happening over a wired connection. Another thing I got to experience with this project is the licensing aspect of the Rockwell world. It brought with it many challenges to overcome, and trying to figure out exactly what we needed to have in order to make it all work. And it took quite a few phone calls and transfers to figure things out, but I'm glad that it all ended up working out. Other than that, I mean, it all went pretty smoothly. The main concern that I have at this point is that my wireless access points aren't going to have a reliable enough connection to keep connection with the iPad and the loader. They're supposed to have a range of 300 feet, clear line of sight, and I don't know whether or not the connection is going to be reliable enough. It'll take a lot of testing, but I just hope we don't have to move to a radio connection instead. And I could go on and on, honestly, but that pretty much sums my project up. It was a great experience to be able to build a project from scratch and overseeing the entire thing. And it's probably the best learning experience I could have had. And I can't wait to get it all wired into our existing setup and fine-tune it to exactly what we need.